It's fitting. It's fitting that Martin Luther King has thought about this Shabbat. It's a Shabbat in which we're introduced to Moses. We begin the book of Exodus this week, and in tonight's service, Cantor Kathy will be reading the beginning of chapter 2, which is the actual verses that describe the birth of Moses, in which two unnamed people, his parents, give birth to a child. And they say the child is so beautiful, it says in the text, that they decide to hide the child because the boy was born during a time in which Pharaoh had decreed that all sons of the children of Israel were to be killed. And so they decide that they'll hide their child, feeling that there's something hopeful about him at a time that was overwhelmed by darkness. And of course, Moses goes on to become a prophet for us, someone who led our people out of that darkness, and many would say the same of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the Midrash, in the stories that are told about this portion, they imagine something very different happening among the people. So I'm going to share this little piece of it. They write, we're taught that during this time, the man named Amram, who was considered the greatest man of his generation, when he learned that Pharaoh said every son who would be born shall be cast into the river, he said to himself, well, why would I even get married then? If I can't have children, why would I get married? Problem was, he was already married. So he divorced his wife. And because he was considered the greatest man of his generation, the Midrash says, the rest of the people, the men, divorced their wives. At that moment, his daughter pulled him aside. She said, Dad, what you are doing is worse than what Pharaoh has decreed. Because he said that all of our sons were to be killed. What you are doing is you're taking away any promise of family in the future at all. And so, as the Midrash says, he remarried his wife, and everybody else remarried their wives too. Happy ending. The story is an example of how we often act when times are dark. We say to ourselves, well, it's not even worth it. There's no hope that this is going to work out, so I'm not even going to try. Pirkei Avot, our text that has been passed on to us at the end of the Mishnah, has a quote in it that says, if you translate it literally, it says, where there are no people, be a person. But we often translate that to mean, or understand it to mean, where there's no humanity, be the human being. When you're in, as Dr. King might have said, when there's darkness all around you, be the light. That's your job. It's not to say there can't be light here, but rather to say, perhaps it's on me to do something in this moment, to be the human being in the midst of those who are acting inhuman. In 1959, actually in 1958, there was a youth march to integrate the schools in our country. In Washington, D.C., thousands and thousands of youth came together to march for the integration of our schools. And Dr. King was supposed to speak, but he was stabbed 2 days prior to the march, and so he didn't make that march. So 6 months later, they gathered 26,000 people, and he did speak. It's a brief speech, and I'm going to share the bulk of it with you tonight. It says 4 things, in my opinion. He turned to our youth and he said, was anybody there? He might have turned to you. Was anybody actually good? No? He said, first, our job is to focus on the future. Second, we have to refuse to accept what is unacceptable. Third, we have to judge success of democracy by how the most vulnerable live. And fourth, If we are to preserve humanity, we have to believe that it's going to take work. It won't happen by itself. Here in his words, he said, "As I stand here and look out upon the thousands of Negro faces and the thousands of white faces intermingled like the waters of a river, I see only one face, the face of the future. Yes, as I gaze upon this great historic assembly, this unprecedented gathering of young people, I cannot help thinking that 100 years from now, the historians will be calling this not the beat generation, but the generation of integration. The fact that thousands of you came here to Washington and that thousands more signed your petition proves that this generation will not take no for an answer, will not take double talk for an answer, will not take gradualism for an answer. It proves that the only answer you will settle for is total desegregation and total equality now. I know of no words eloquent enough to express the deep meaning, the great power, and the unconquerable spirit that are at the back of this inspiringly original, uniquely American march of young people. Nothing like it has ever happened in the history of our nation. Nothing, that is, except the last youth march. What this march demonstrates to me above all else is that you young people, through your own experience, have somehow discovered the central fact of American life, that the extension of democracy for all Americans depends upon complete integration of Negro Americans. Indeed, in your great movement to organize a march for integrated schools, you've actually accomplished much more. You've awakened on hundreds of campuses throughout the land a new spirit of social inquiry to the benefit of all Americans. And it really is a noble cause. As June approaches with its graduation ceremonies and speeches, a thought suggests itself. You will hear much about careers, security, and prosperity. I will leave the discussion of such matters to your deans, your principals, and your valedictorians. But I do have a graduation thought to pass along to you. Whatever career you may choose for yourself, doctor, lawyer, teacher, let me propose an avocation to be pursued along with it. Become a dedicated fighter for civil rights. Make it a central part of your life. It will make you a better doctor, a better lawyer, a better teacher. It will enrich your spirit as nothing else possibly can. It will give you that rare sense of nobility that can only spring from love and selflessly helping your fellow man. Make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. This week, as we turn to the words of Exodus, we turn to a story that was written about a boy who was supposed to not be there, but who grew up and recognized much, I think, of what Dr. King shared in that speech and many others. And then, not only did he lead our people to freedom, but his story became the banner of what freedom looks like. And so in the moments when perhaps we think that there is no light left, or there's just no chance of hope and opportunity, I would ask us to think of the words of Dr. King, the words and the story of Moses, the words of Pirkei Avot, that when it seems like there is no opportunity, perhaps we are supposed to create that opportunity for ourselves and for others. Shabbat Shalom. We'll turn now to that very story as we turn to our Torah and we read those first words of chapter 2 of the book of Exodus. Please rise as we take our Torah from the ark.